All right, we are recording.
Okay, thank you. This is 1:00 on May 29th, a meeting of the Land Use Review Board. I am the chair, Janet Hurley. I will ask each board member to introduce themselves as I see them on screen here. Sarah.
Sarah Had, board member present.
Rick.
Brooke Dinglejean, board member present.
Alex.
Alex Weinhagen. Hello, everyone.
And Kirsten.
Kirsten Sultan, board member present.
First item on the agenda, other than call to order, is agenda updates. Any changes to the agenda from any board members? Seeing or hearing none, we now have opportunity for public comment on non-agenda items. Public comment for agenda items will be provided after each agenda item is addressed by the board. Thomas, do you have anything for us today in general?
No.
Okay. We can then move to consent agenda. So we have minutes from May 14th and May 19th. Do we have any motion on approving those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve both minutes.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Kirsten, you want to second it?
I'll second it with the caveat that the motion would be to approve them with any revisions.
Okay. Is that good with you, Sarah? Okay. Any discussion on that motion? Okay.
So
there.
oh,
Go ahead.
I did send one revision to Rebecca Shalafo concerning the May 14th minutes. The specific motion on docket 24 ENV 00086 was a motion to authorize legal staff to enter into settlement negotiations in that docket. So I don't know if
So
and I did check the recording.
So currently the motion says in docket number 24 ENV 0086, vote to reject renewed settlement offer and proceed with summary judgment motions. That is incorrect, you're saying?
Right.
And
the
it
motion
should
was to authorize legal staff to enter into settlement negotiations.
Okay. Rebecca?
Yes. Yep. We can make that change.
Okay. Any other comments, revisions on the minutes?
I had two minor ones on May 14th. On page 3, the top of page 3, agenda item E, there's a subheader RGP. What is RGP? I assume that's regional plan, but I don't know what the G is.
Is it guidelines, Rebecca?
Yeah, that's usually what I refer to as the regional. I don't have the minutes open, so I can double check and clarify.
Okay, so it just that I think it's regional plan guidelines, so it should probably just be spelled out.
Okay.
Because RGP isn't something that anybody else understands.
Understood.
So regional plan guidelines work. I think that's what was being discussed there. So I imagine that's what our RGP was referring to.
Sounds good. And the next set of minutes has it spelled out. So that's great. And then the other minor one was 2 paragraphs down under the tier 3 report that I provided. there's a paragraph that starts, the stakeholder meetings have been a productive set of discussions. And then there's a sentence, the next sentence is, there was potentially some interest in having another stakeholder meeting, and I decided we're not going to do that immediately. In the minutes, it should just say my name, as opposed to I. That's an easy one, Rebecca.
Got it. Thanks, Alex.
Yep.
Okay, any others for the 14th or the 19th? Okay, can I ask for all those in favor to say aye? Aye.
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 That is unanimous. Both minutes are approved. Both sets of minutes. So we can move down to studies and reports. Let's start with appeals. A for appeals.
Nice to be in the beginning of the alphabet. Our third meeting for stakeholders is scheduled for June 12th. Kirsten will be attending that one. We're going to be looking at some board models that have been provided and shared by some of the stakeholders on different conceptions of how board or panels of board members would be able to serve in the appellate function. And I'm sending out a new summary of everything that we've done to date, not only to our stakeholders, just to make sure if they missed something, but it reorganizes all the materials which are on our appeals website. But I think it's a much easier way to look comprehensively through everything that we've done. And embedded in that, Alex P has helped me to put links so that if people want more information, they can go to the actual materials, like the PowerPoint presentations and that kind of thing, the notes that were taken. So even though I put some summaries in there and some representative information, it really is a comprehensive whole of everything we're doing in the study. So hopefully that will be really helpful, and planning to share that with our district commissioners, our district coordinators, and I have a meeting next week with our coordinators to talk about the appeals study and spend some time with them to see what kind of input that they have. And then we're setting up another meeting with legal so that Allison can begin to conceptualize these different models that will be discussed in terms of capacity, what kind of personnel would be required, as well as resources, because the amendment to Act 181 is also requiring us now to provide a financial analysis. So Rachel is posed to do that, but we have to be able to give her the relevant information for the models that end up being deemed viable by the group. And so that further step is required. So Allison is really going to be very helpful in trying to guide the understanding of these different proposed models and how we would be able to logistically fulfill those models. So looking forward to those conversations.
Hey, Brooke.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned an amendment to Act 181. Is that something that is passed, and is that something that is the legislature is still considering, or what?
I haven't followed the bill recently, so I'm not positive. Maybe Pete knows, but the two
Is it
changes.
the housing?
Yeah,
Sorry,
the
is
two
it-
changes.
Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
The two changes that affect the appeals study was they actually changed the deadline in the bill that I was looking at to November 15th. And then the other piece of it was putting in the requirement that we do that financial analysis piece.
Okay.
Which
And
we
that was
talked.
in the housing bill, I think. And I think they, unless they did it this morning, they haven't passed that yet.
And we had talked with Representative Mahali about this when we testified early on.
Mhm.
And so when we were chatting about that component, that he was interested in having also accomplished that piece as well, so that they were more informed about the viability and cost of, altering how appeals happen.
Yeah,
So it's not a big surprise. Rachel and I have discussed it, in a conceptual fashion. But we do need to figure out those kind of logistics so that she has the data that she needs to be able to then cost it out for us.
okay. I see a hand up. Is that Thomas or Maddie?
It's Thomas.
It's actually Thomas. The bill legislature's working on is S-127, which is the version that came out of the Senate, and they appointed members of the Committee of Conference last night, and I have not followed it since then.
Thank you, Thomas.
You're welcome.
Alex?
So Brooke, that summary that you're preparing to help prep everyone for the June 12th meeting, that's great. Super important. I think that's what I heard at the last meeting I was at, that at least some of the stakeholders were thinking like, okay, help us gel what we've been talking about so we can chime in with what hasn't been suggested, or render some opinion about what is being suggested. Is that summary, are you going to put that up on the website? Maybe you said that already and I lost it in translation, but
Yeah, it's going out to the stakeholder group and then to the other, like our district commissioners and our staff that I'm going to be meeting with next week. And this will go on the website as, the summary to date of the entire process, so people can click on it. And the links are to all the different materials that are on our appeals website, but they were categorized like according to which meeting that the topic was discussed and those materials were reviewed at. So this puts it into that topical, bringing it all in an organized fashion so that people can see all of the information we've collected, the issues that have arisen in a summary fashion, and they get it soup to nuts, but I've been trying to do it in a readable, not too much information, and have those links available so that people can then inform themselves further to understand something if they want more info on it. The last part of it, I've done everything through the two meetings. And the last part of it right now, I'm having Alex help me put all of these board models into a separate document instead of having to click on things, so that it's easier to compare what we're looking at. But this is the board models are, okay, folks, this is where we're now going. And we've sent them out in prior emails to stakeholders, but this way, again, it's organized, and now we understand, okay, this is now what we're talking about. And we're going to look at each of these and discuss the viability of them, or what's good and bad and that kind of thing.
yeah.
So,
So 2 points. One, I think it's important for the summary to go up on the website so that folks who are not in the stakeholder group and maybe have been waiting for a chance to learn more or attend the June 12th meeting have the same information that the stakeholders have. And I'm trying to, do a little bit of advertising in the planning community about your meetings, since they are public, and being able to point people to a synopsis to date would be super helpful. So that's great. And my only suggestion, not knowing exactly how you're structuring the summary, is some of the suggestions coming from stakeholders with a model, one of the board models, are relatively lengthy. And so if the summary had some sort of, brief, like 3-sentence synopsis of model A, model B, model C, and then links to go to the more of the dirt on it, that'll probably help people who are not as plugged in.
Right, and that's exactly what I'm working on right now is to give a descriptor to it. So we know, all right, this is the ALJ model, which is administrative law judge kind of model. This is like the PUC model, that kind of thing. So try and then give them like 3 or 4 bullet points on this is district commission recommendation to the board, appeal only to the Supreme Court. That's one of the models, like the PUC, right?
Yeah, perfect. That
Yeah.
sounds great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brooke.
And the other thing that I'm working on is the testimony. There's many different testimonies from past studies or even the predecessor study that led to Act 181. And that testimony, I'm putting very brief synopses of them because it's like, here's their testimony. This is important to read, but it's to really focus people on this is the import of this. Pay attention to this piece of it. So that's been time consuming, but I'm almost done with it. So I was in wood products manufacturing land this weekend, so didn't get as far as I wanted.
Hey, Brooke, when you send out to the stakeholders, are you sending it out to your stakeholder list regardless of whether they showed up for previous meetings?
Yes, and
Okay.
but we've had such a robust response. We lost some folks on the second meeting, but almost everybody on the email list has participated, even if they couldn't. There are a couple of people that I've had interviews and conversations with who could not make the meetings yet. So we're trying to make sure that everybody has the opportunity for, ample voice here.
I didn't see for the last meeting who showed up, but I was a little worried that it didn't look like there were affordable housing advocacy groups that had participated yet at some point, and I don't know if that's still the case.
Actually, I got an email, and I'm bad with names.
That's okay.
It's a new lady that's come in for the Vermont Housing Preservation. I'm
Vermont
forgetting
Housing
the
Conservation Board, VHCB.
Conservation Board, right.
Yeah.
And so she is also coming in, and so we have now another representative because of their scheduling, I believe. But I think that they have been present.
They
at
have,
both-
but the affordable housing developers are the ones that I was concerned that I didn't see on an attendance list.
Yeah, and Kathy, oh gosh.
Kathy Bayer.
Kathy Byer?
Yeah.
Kathy
Fire,
Bayer.
yes. She did not make it, but I'm gonna reach out to her because her testimony was really important
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
And yes, we do want to make sure they're there.
Yeah.
So I will double check and reach out and make sure that I also just wanted to talk with her because I was really impressed with all of the issues she raised during her testimony. It's
Mhm.
important. So I will,
Yeah.
but I'm not sharing testimony without asking people. So,
Yeah.
even though it's on the web and all, but, just to be
Yeah.
courteous and.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Brooke from anybody? On appeals. Thank you, Brooke. Let's go to Alex for tier 3.
Right, so tier 3 is trundling along. Was planning to just, have head down in maps and analysis. But the stakeholder group requested an extra meeting. So I think I've already told you that's been scheduled for next week on June 3rd. And yeah, we'll see what they have to say at that point. I unfortunately won't have a package of to sort of present them ahead of that meeting, but don't want to squelch a desire or an opportunity to get more conversation. So that's what's up next for tier 3. My deadline for delivering a draft to all of you, not for discussion, but just for receiving it, is still June 12th, with our first actual discussion of that draft on June 19th. I will say that I did get feedback from one person who attended the public meeting on May 22nd, who's I think he's a consulting forester. I think he may also own a timber or forestry business. In any case, his suggestion was there's a lot of folks in rural Vermont that are curious and or concerned about tier 3 designations, and it's great to have meetings with remote connections, but some folks in those parts of the state have trouble with internet. His suggestion was you should have a meeting in every county on tier 3, and I said I'm with you in terms of wanting to have more accessible meetings. Not sure I can commit to a meeting in every county, but I just wanted to put it out there that at least there's been some feedback about the need to get outside of just the few meetings that we've scheduled or that I've scheduled. And so I'll be thinking about ways to do that, and maybe less formal meetings that, I can just go and do a meeting, and maybe it doesn't have to be a hybrid thing. It can be a in-person only. I don't know. I'm pondering the possibilities later in the summer.
I wonder if you can get the assistance of the RPCs to sort of get that information out there. Like maybe you can purvey it to RPCs that, have primarily rural municipalities, and they can help get the information out. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd like to leverage them as well as Vermont League of Cities and Towns. But everybody's been busy, including the VLCT with the legislature. So the sooner the legislature gets out of Montpelier, I think the better for all of us on a variety of fronts. So maybe there'll be some more wiggle room then. That was all I had on tier 3. I do have a quick update on criterion 8C. So that's another rulemaking effort, as you all know, that has not yet begun. But the time horizon has us getting stakeholders together, or at least understanding who they are and talking to them about starting the process by July 1. And actually, I take that back. I believe our deadline's in June. In any case, we need to identify the criterion 8C stakeholders soon. It's been on my to-do list for a while. And so this is me telling all of you that if you have ideas about who you'd like to see on in that working group, in that stakeholder group, please ping me or give me a call or send me an email so that I can make sure I get your suggestions into the list of people to be considered. It's my not so complicated strategy is to actually reach out to the tier 3 stakeholders because I think many of them are going to be interested and might be appropriate to be part of the criterion 8C stakeholder group. So maybe look at that list too if you have access to it, and if there's anybody on there that you're like, maybe not that one, or just again a little bit of informal between us conversations so that I can start to send invites out and build that stakeholder list.
Okay, thanks. Kirsten, or no, we've got forest, we've got wood products separate. So, Sarah.
I think Annette has her hand up first.
Oh, okay. Annette, go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry I'm late. I signed in at 1 o'clock and the link on the agenda did not work. So I wrote to Maddie after 10 minutes of waiting and she sent me another link. So just be aware of that. I did want to make a public comment, and I can wait on that whenever it's convenient, but I did want to comment on the public meeting that Alex held for tier 3. And I always am interested to note who turned people out. I heard that VNRC had actually sent out a postcard to its members. So I was pretty surprised to see the turnout was really heavily loggers and forestry people, and not very many ecologists. And my takeaway from it was that the input was more about what not to do and not so much constructive in terms of what areas should be in tier 3. So that's just my observation on that. It's something that I've seen happen in the 30 by 30 meetings too, but this was unique. I noticed there were way more men than women first of all. And then I'm like, oh, hey, who are these, the loggers? Yes, it was the loggers. So I want to offer a comment to you on the input I'm getting on the future land use maps. And I can do that now or I can wait.
Let's finish our 2 quick updates, and I'm giving one on regional plan, and we can get that comment there.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Sarah, do you want to do tier 1A, or do you think it makes
I'll
more
just
sense
do-
for me to go first?
You can go first by all means if you want.
Maybe, because tier 1A follows regional plan. So Sarah and I have been working with Rebecca Chalafo on drafting guidelines for regional plan applications and our review of regional plans, going through the pre-application phase into the phase at which we will hold a hearing and then make a determination of compliance, either affirmative or negative. We need to parse this down to all the possibilities that might happen, including the minor map amendment and separate tier 1B requests, and understanding that the plan includes various elements, including the regional future land use map with the future land use categories. So we're hopefully going to finish Monday morning and share our guidelines with internal staff who are helping in terms of setting up the structure that we will need in place in order to take in these applications. And later in June, we'll bring this to the board. I think now, Annette, might be a good point for your question or comment.
So I've had my own experience with my town, and then I've received unsolicited comments from other people after their experience. So I thought it would be a worthwhile to just give you a little of this because it is concerning. So I live in a town that does have a planning commission, but for some reason, the regional planning commission did not come to the planning commission. Our planning commission does offer video and audio and meets in person. Our select board is where the regional planning commission came. Our select board will not provide us with video. The guy who does the audio has a camera right there, but absolutely we have tried. We are also not allowed to speak except during public comment at the beginning on agenda items. So when the regional planning commission staffer came to the meeting, he showed a map, which nobody on Zoom could watch. So the guy who runs the camera, there's no chat for the public, but I could write to him. So I said this is, and he wants to turn his camera on, but he's not allowed to. So I said, I'd like to see the map. And so he sent me a link and I had to hunt, but I found the map. And without any consultation with the town or the planning commission, the regional planning commission had added a village center. And some of the people on the select board said, well, that's not good. And they gave some reasons. And I posted in the chat, even though we're not allowed to weigh in, that I knew that the fields where they were proposing a village center were soaking wet and not appropriate. So that comment actually did get read. It was I broke the rules, but that's what happened. And then after the meeting, and so the select board actually voted to remove that village center designation. After the meeting, somebody wrote to me and said, this seemed to have been done without any public input. How, so whether or not I agree with the decision of removing the village center, the fact is that the public was entirely excluded from being able to say anything. Even the people in the room, and there were people in person, they couldn't comment on it. And I also realized that our future land use map contains 2 aquifer protection areas. One source protection area is for the municipal water supply, and the other is for an area below a mine site that was proposed for a big mine, and everybody in the area is on groundwater. And so the town, and with the support of the Regional Planning Commission, put an aquifer protection area on there. So I wrote to the staff person who came, and I said, what about our source protection area? Shouldn't that be carried over onto the map? And he wrote back and said, we will take your comment into consideration. All of which was not very good public process, and not very supportive of the idea that these maps are being done in a public way. So then I heard from someone, and I'm going to leave out the names of the towns. I'm going to leave out the names of the regional planning commissions, but this information is coming from several different regional planning commissions. We have gone over the map at the last planning commission meeting. We believe the map screws up details, but the big problem is that we're supposed to agree to these zones without first knowing what the legislature is going to require in these zones. From another town, the draft future land use maps they have been developing in accordance with Act 181 have designated my area as a planned growth area. In my wife's words, they're absolutely nuts. Another one, I've been involved locally fighting the RPC on the housing quotas. They're terribly misleading and inaccurate growth map, and the desire to classify as much as they can here as Tier 1B and be exempt to town from Act 250. Another one, the RPC came to us with a designated town center that they imposed without consulting us, and in complete contradiction to our town plan. It took 5 minutes of forceful resistance for him to finally back down and say, well, okay, it isn't required now. And then someone else wrote and said the categories that were presented didn't align with what the town plan intended. The map displayed lands that are being used for agriculture and not lands with prime ag soils. The conservation area lands were limited to high elevations, wetlands, and riparian corridors. So it just wanted to give you all the sense that in half a dozen different towns, the process is not collaborative with the towns. It feels like a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up approach. Now, one person said that what they presented to us did pretty much align with our future land use map. But everybody else is that they're upset that these village centers are being put in. One person said they put 5 village centers into our town, and we don't want any. And so, okay, you're required to have at least a hamlet.
I don't know that you're required, but
well, that's what they're being told, is that you have to either have a village center or a hamlet. And so clarification on all that would be very helpful. And
I mean, I think what Act 181 did is it said that every town should have the option of having a village center. And it may be at this point that the RPCs are providing that. They're going to the towns, and if the towns say no, then the towns say no. Now, as for not being allowed to provide input, I don't know if that's your particular select board rules. It doesn't sound like that particular select board is following open meeting law.
It's following open meeting law. They are not required to provide video. They're required to provide audio. They do everything just to the edge of the law.
And so that's something that as a
There's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
Except vote them out. And it's
Right.
it's very frustrating. So
Yeah.
I know I've worked in a lot of towns. I often say to people, there's no town worse than mine. But the fact is that we've been dealing with this same dynamic for 30 years, and nothing ever changes, even though we try. So, and also I do want to point out this idea that regional planning commissions are good with the public. I reviewed every agenda or all the minutes for the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, which I served on for 12 years. So I have my own personal experience, but I looked for every meeting for 2024, no public attended. So it's just the construct that's been set up. I'm actually concerned where it relates to what your work is, that the only opportunity the public's going to have is to come to you guys when you have 15 days to approve a plan. And that's where people are.
We'll have the pre-application review as well. and our intention is to go to the region for a meeting during that pre-application review.
So there may be the need for you to send things back, or for the, if your level is where the public is actually going to weigh in. This is not going how I expected it to go at all. And that they didn't even go to our planning commission baffles me. So there's no consistency. This is what's happened throughout with all these regional planning commissions. Everyone's in their own little world. They don't do things in a consistent way. Everyone's doing different things. I have not had any complaints or heard anything back about the BCRC or the Wyndham Regional Commission, but I've considered surveying our members to say, are you even paying attention to this? And what are you hearing? And how's it going? So the people who contacted me are active in their communities and are on their planning commissions or know to pay attention, but a lot of people don't. So I just thought it was worth flagging that for you and letting you know.
Yeah, thanks. Brooke?
I just want to say, I don't know about the video audio thing. Maybe just audio is compliant, but I would venture to suggest not when documents are being shared, because if people cannot see them, then that is not sharing that information with the public. I'm not exactly sure, maybe Secretary of State might be able to help if you made a call to them.
Many people have tried. They've called. They basically have told us, vote them out.
Yeah.
But there's no enforcement. Anybody who thinks there's enforcement of ethics rules or anything like that we've learned there just isn't.
Sarah?
So there is, for better or for worse, there is, I just feel the need to state that there is an ethics commission for the state of Vermont. It's ethics commission at vermont.gov that has oversight per Acts 171 of municipalities that I'd recommend following up with.
People have gone to them. Yep, we've done that. And turns out there's nothing that they can do. And the ethics person on our select board is the one with the quarry that wants to expand. And so it's all just it's all tied up with the people who have their own interests. And there's the ethics. If you go and actually read the ethics commission's rules, there is nothing that they can actually do. They have no enforcement capability.
At any rate, I think, in terms of what we as our board have purview over and what we can do is I can just recommend that, unfortunately, that's something that we can't fix. I think per Brooke's comments, there's also the Secretary of State, there are other agencies to assist. We're not perhaps the best agency to assist in terms of a local board and helping with that process. But what I would say is I just want to take a minute to recommend the diversity of RPCs and the tasks that they've been given. And I think from what I've observed is you have a lot of RPCs trying at this point. They're deploying various different ways of engagement. I think most RPCs also have the ability for municipal reps on their boards too. And a lot of these positions have gone unfilled in previous years, or lack of attendance by the municipal reps at the regional plan. So there are various ways to get involved, and I would encourage people to try and get involved in those. In terms of the feedback and the way that I believe most of the RPCs, if not all of them, have different engagement policies that should be on their websites and readily available, and that they should be following as part of this. And so that might give you some insight in terms of, are they starting with some of these informal meetings, and then there'll be a more formal process whereby a larger community, but just places to go for more information, because I think you have over the next 2 years, we're going to be seeing all of them coming in. All of them are at different stages. Some are much more preliminary than others. And so I would hope that sort of once you identify the different opportunities for involvement, there would be a chance for more people to be heard through those processes.
And I'll just add that, one of the requirements under Act 181 in the environmental justice law is that RPCs are reaching out for meaningful engagement in more than just ways. Like going to the select board once is not going to be, meeting the obligations that a regional planning commission has to engage people in the development of the plan. So I would wager that there are going to be more opportunities for input that aren't dependent on your particular intransigent select board. So with that, can we have a Tier 1A update?
I will make it the extra express version because we're recognizing that we're way over on time. But just so Friday I got out a brief 5-page outward facing memo to some of our stakeholders, including VAPTA, to give an overview as to what we're thinking of for a framework for Tier 1A applications. So hopefully VAPTA is going to try and get comment from member communities that are looking to possibly apply with questions. Had a great presentation to the all staff on Wednesday. Again, we have a great group to pull from with various different questions, much more specific in terms of guidance in implementation. And I think Pete's asked for that to sort of come through. And so I'm hoping that we're going to get a pipeline through VAPTA, through our staff, and we can use that. I've asked for it back by June 20th to then formalize guidance and hopefully answer a lot of the questions through the guidance. And I also put out a complimentary memo about how to research, and just if you're a community thinking of doing it, here are ways to find out what you have for rare threat endangered species, river corridors, and the like. So sort of hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we'll be getting more information back on that, more questions. I look forward to it. There's an open door. Maddie was very great about putting that on the website too. So hopefully once we get some of that feedback, we'll look to then get back to working on the guidance and bringing that back to the board, hopefully for midsummer.
So, and as Sarah pointed out, we have gone over. I think we can probably make up at least some of our time by truncating operations, budget, and legislative updates, but let's get to wood products.
Yeah, so as the board knows, there was a second stakeholder meeting on May 15th. And since that time, I developed a working draft that Brooke was gracious to provide some time and assistance with. It went to Forest and Parks as a working draft. Forest and Parks replied with somewhat substantive input. And then Brooke and I went through all of that substantive input and came up with the draft #1 version that is on the website alongside today's agenda, and that you've hopefully had a chance to read through. And so that document basically can be considered to be a preliminary recommendation from 2 of the board members, Brooke and I. But I just would emphasize it's a draft, and obviously the whole board, and the purpose of today's meeting is to go through it and see see where there's questions or what you like, what you don't like. And so I know we've already gone over some of the information that was gathered through the survey and the file review. And then in addition, there was some other challenges identified during the stakeholder meetings and also as a result of the direct outreach to the sector that occurred. And so all of that is compiled in section 3 of the report. What I'd like to do, if it's okay, is focus on the section that really examines all the different ideas that were put on the table, because I feel like that's kind of where the heart of the recommendations lies, and go through them one at a time and look to get input. I'll also mention it has gone to staff, like Pete, general counsel, haven't yet received feedback from those key staff, but it did also go out to the to the coordinators, and I have received input from a couple coordinators, which I'm happy to share as well. So
So, do you want to share screen, Kirsten?
yeah, that's what I was
And-
thinking, and just go through it with track changes on.
And are we gonna start on page 10, section 5?
Yeah, so can
Okay.
you
Yep, great.
see
Yep.
that?
Yep.
Yeah, so the first item here, an apology too, I'm under the weather again, and so Brooke's gonna help me out here. But and Brooke or anyone feel free to jump in, but this idea number 1, which is these ideas in section 5 are all the ones that Brooke and I would recommend to advance as, you know, to implement. Or make a recommendation to the legislature. So this one was seen as fairly straightforward to consolidate for wood products manufacturers the information that's relevant to that sector, in addition to some other things that stakeholder group participants felt would be helpful. So we don't I think for sake of time, I wasn't envisioning that we would go through sort of word for word, line for line. But I myself saw this as a fairly straightforward item. For some parks, so this would be done collaboratively with ANR through the Policy and Planning Office. They would help us with developing this. You know, most of it's Act 250 specific, but there's also some notice of resources within ANR that would be included. And then FPR would help disseminate it. We would have it as a link within the Act 250 application guide, and we would also make it available on the website. So does anyone have any questions or comments, or, you know, there's a fair bit of content that would be captured on this fact sheet and supplemental guidance. Alex.
Who really is the intended audience for the fact sheet and the supplemental guidance? Is it potential applicants, or is it our own staff, district coordinators, or is it both?
It's everyone. It's mostly at a minimum prospective wood products manufacturing applicants, but it's also useful to any person interested in like specific elements of Act 250 as they pertain to wood products manufacturers.
Okay. Yeah, so I think this is a no-brainer. I think it's a great idea. But if the audience is in fact potential applicants, I would this doesn't have to be in the report, but I would hope that we would make it as readable and as short as possible. Like having a fact sheet and supplemental guidance that's 25 pages, just because we can do that, and we're detail oriented, would be counterproductive. You know, for this to work, it's got to be something that an average person who's in the industry would actually pick up and look at. But I think it's a great idea, and I'm glad it's in there.
Okay. Anybody else?
I would concur with what Alex said, as short as possible
Okay.
and as accessible as possible.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I also agree it's a no-brainer.
Okay.
Let me just add, but this is really important because there are some issues that we want to make sure that the wood products manufacturers know about and can avail themselves of, like Stony Brook determinations, which means, the entire tract of land would not be implicated for Act 250 jurisdiction if, certain conditions are met. And so we were trying to focus on making sure that the benefits that do exist, the mitigation ratios on soils and that is very well understood. These are the important things that we're trying to call out and make sure that they can avail themselves of.
Brooke just made a reference to Stony Brook, and I think for this, if it's, primary audience is a potential wood products manufacturer, that we don't have to explain what Stony Brook is, and we probably shouldn't use the term Stony Brook, but what we should explain in simple terms is that for a large parcel, that you can provide a map that shows what the involved project area is, and potentially limit the jurisdictional portions to that parcel. Like, you don't have to get into Stony Brook and all of that, and that certainly you can have links maybe, or you can direct people to the more detailed and I can't come up with
Yeah.
a word,
Yeah.
information, but yeah, just, you can do this in a few simple sentences.
Okay, thanks. I think that was the idea behind that was so this could also, if this does advance, which it sounds like it will, we could return to the board with the actual fact sheet and guidance that I would envision would be developed with staff, like not just A&R, but staff will be, this is sort of like, the application guide kind of content. But everything everyone's saying makes sense. Brooke, did you want to add something? Okay. And this is like sort of part 2 of that same initiative is, okay, once this is available, go over it with staff. And there was interest from FPR in participating in that, staff training, if you will, in having that opportunity to meet with staff alongside our staff who provide program training. So this would be sort of further coordinated, but it would just be, okay, now we have this thing. Let's make sure everyone understands it, has the information, knows where to find it, etc. Anytime one encounters one of these applications or applicants, and then similarly offer it out to the sector, was sort of part B. Go ahead.
Just even more of a no-brainer.
Okay.
So,
Okay, yeah, that seemed straightforward. So this is something A&R said that they could do. That, even though this is a board report, there was a commitment that, there was some discussion about other ideas that appear later in the report of things that aren't recommended for advancement. One of them was like, could A&R have like a fast lane for permitting for this sector? And anyhow, this is what they landed on, that they could offer sector-specific permit coordination and support in the same way that they do now for larger, more complex projects, to do some more of that basically hand-holding and support for this sector. So that, any questions about that? And that's part of the information that would be made known too on the fact sheet and guidance. And now we get into kind of rule update items. So Rule 19 is the rule which defines permit presumptions. And one of the attachments that's on our page as part of this draft outlines the relationship between all of the different ancillary state permits, A&R permits, as they pertain to the different Act 250 criteria. And I'm not going to pull it up, but basically it illustrates also the current list of permits from A&R, which what's in Act 250 Rule 19 is not up to date with respect to the current A&R permits. So this would be recognizing that Rule 19 would be updated and that the board would also, as part of that, be assessing the timing of those A&R permits with respect to the Act 250 application review process, as to whether or not, which are the specific permits, do they need to be, in hand? What are the mechanics of how it works? You may recall that one of the findings from the file review is that there is some period of time in Act 250 when commissions are awaiting receipt of A&R permits. And so this would consider which permits and how the commission might not have to, await receipt of a particular permit as part of this topic that the board would take up as part of its rulemaking. So it's relevant to the sector, but it also has this broader purpose. Alex.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say is that I want to do this anyway. Like outside of wood products manufacturing, I would like to revisit Rule 19 in general. So I think it's great that it's in here. And if it's one more poke at us to get it done once we get through the Act 181 business and we can get on to rulemaking more generally, I think it's great. It's yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it was, some of the wood products manufacturing participants would occasionally kind of point out, well, gee, this seems like something that's general, like pertains more broadly and generally to Act 250. And so how does this help us? Like what's the specificity with respect to wood products manufacturing? And so we tried to get at some of that. We did with respect to the next rule update that would be contemplated. But I think, I think it doesn't negate that it came up as part of this wood product study, and I think it's relevant to still include it. Does anyone have any other? So Rule 34 establishes in part, when an existing permitted project has, when a developer is undertaking a change to an existing permitted project or one that is grandfathered, that's pre-1970, what Act 250 calls pre-existing development, that if built today would need a permit because it's been there since prior to the enactment of Act 250, it doesn't fall under an Act 250 permit. There's rules that prescribe when an Act 250 permit or permit amendment would be triggered for those kinds of projects changes. And so this action would look at those rules to review if and when permit amendments or permits in the first instance are triggered. And there was the concern from the stakeholder group in part was that there are some changes that are seen to have, in some cases, a positive benefit, like a stormwater treatment system being implemented as a consequence of the new 3-acre stormwater rule, or equipment modernization, or changing from diesel to 3-phase power, which reportedly was in some cases being delayed due to a desire to avoid Act 250 review. So it would be looking at, the kinds of changes that are specific to the sector as a component of this rule review and potential update. Is there any questions about that? And then the last one is concerns. Well, there's Part C is specifically looking at the rule to contemplate whether or not it would be changed, but it's looking at administrative amendments. So the file review and other stakeholder group feedback pointed out that there's a significant reduction in the use of administrative amendments. So it'd be looking at The rule is fairly strict in that an administrative amendment can't be the permit format used when there's impacts under the criteria. So it would be looking at whether or not that standard could be relaxed to allow district commissions through the coordinator perhaps to issue an administrative amendment, which is a simpler type of Act 250 permit amendment. Doesn't involve a notice period. Any questions about that? And then this would not be a rule change necessarily. It wasn't envisioned. It's an existing rule that's available. And this would involve the board working with, asking commissions and staff for input on how is this working? Should there be more defined guidance to provide participants with, related more specific tools or avenues to resolve non-adversarial issues that come up that maybe can be resolved, for instance, without the need to convene a hearing or through some agreed upon permit conditions, things like that. So it's basically just looking at this rule that we already have and how's it working? Are there some enhancements that could be put forward in guidance? Brooke.
Yeah, I just want to add, we saw some overlap on this issue because in the appeals study, when I met with our commission chairs, one of the issues that was raised is the difficulty now with open meeting law and needing to get relief for having to broadcast or, do an open meeting during a site visit. And because this rule or this notion of trying to meet informally ahead of time has actually been used vastly successfully in at least one of our districts where it has significantly reduced the number of appeals or even intervention motions in the permitting process because it gave an early opportunity for people to understand what the project was. One of our commissions actually goes out and does an informal site visit when they're deciding major and minor. And it has, in the majority of situations, they believe, reduced the number of appeals and has vastly helped relations between developers and neighbors and municipalities. So we are very hopeful that that relief is going to be given through the open meeting law amendment that's, we think, going through, because it is essential, because it's at the beginning of the pipeline, right? If we can reduce the number of appeals that are coming into the system, we don't have to figure out how to make them go through faster. And the benefits from this informal process and how it has historically been used in that regard within Act 250 is really very beneficial. And I think it's essential to try to continue to allow them to do that. So.
Alex?
Yeah, so to riff on what Brooke was saying, I'd be interested in seeing some data on that, as it seems like it should help a lot. And if there is one district who's using it successfully as a protocol tool, then I'd like to learn more about that and see the data that backs up that it has been successful. Because honestly, when I first looked at this recommendation, I thought, well, that's a good idea. And then my second thought was, is it really going to make much difference? Are people that, largely intransigent with, large manufacturing operations, whether it, like wood processing manufacturing operations, and is, having more nice conversation at the front end actually going to make a difference? Even though theoretically it seems like it should. So I support it. I just think that assuming that we do this and we spend some time and energy on doing this, that we just get some data to back up what we're talking about and get some experiential comments from this district that Brooke's talking about that's using it successfully.
Janet?
You're
Janet?
muted.
Oh,
Sorry, I was just thinking about it in terms of the site visit being a commission host, sort of like a commission hosted event, but there's nothing that prevents any developer from meeting with neighbors and others before they submit and put, a lot of effort into their engineering plans and whatnot. And I don't know if there's some way to encourage, applicants to do that, depending on what change might come from the open meeting law that would allow use of site visits for this purpose by commissions. In any event, I think it's common practice to, if you want to avoid conflict, to try to involve people early on. So to avoid conflict later, but so it's a principle. And the question is it something that the commission has to be a part of? Or can it be separate? And then if the commission is going to have site visits, to what extent does that, maybe Brooke has looked at it more closely, to what extent does the current language that's being considered by the legislature solve the open meeting law problem that the commissions were having with this?
Yeah, my understanding, Jenna, is that they're exempting out site visits, and no evidence is ever taken at them anyway. Everybody has to be
Right.
reminded you're not here to testify, and you got to say it in court. But I think they just got caught in the net now because it's if they show up as a quorum. And one of the things we discussed was, well, maybe the chair could go instead, or the district coordinator. Don't send a whole quorum of the commission there. Because
Yeah.
it's a really important tool that at least in one area has been really successful. It is also something that Annette Smith has been beating the drum about for many, many years. She has been successful in this kind of engagement in many different venues and types of projects. I think starting way back with her pipeline project. And I've always said, well, it's always up to the permittee or the applicant. They have to agree and that kind of thing. But hearing from our commission chair about how beneficial it's been. See, at the PUC, they have 45-day notice periods, and people get told farther in advance about things, whereas in Act 250, often it's like, oh, there's a hearing on something, and they show up and get handed a list of the 10 criteria. And people often respond negatively because they don't feel like they're informed, or so anything that we can do to encourage the use of this kind of opportunity, I think is really helpful, particularly in the wood products area. So even though it's not specific to them, I hope it will benefit them as well.
it is encouraged in the application guide, and the coordinators generally also promote that applicants talk to their neighbors, particularly if they may have a known neighbor issue or depending on this, the circumstances. Are we comfortable with that one? And these are just, it occurs to me, I can probably, I'm trying to capture these sort of cryptic notes for me of our conversation. I can just watch the recording. I think I'll stop the note taking. Just,
Keep going, Kirsten, keep
you're probably
going, or
looking at
we-
it going, it doesn't look quite right.
It's okay, but just keep going. Otherwise, we won't get
Okay,
through it.
so item 5 encompasses several elements, and the first one concerns these existing statutory provisions as they pertain to farming, which are in the text box. And there's a request, as logging and farming where located, logging and forestry and farming agriculture where located below 2,500 feet is exempt. The farming exemption has some other explicit language that is the language here. And the request is, well, how come logging doesn't get this same explicit language? And so basically the recommendation is, sure, as long as it encompasses, this kind of thing, will not conflict with any permit condition issued pursuant to this chapter. In other words, doesn't run afoul of Act 250 obligations, and nor would it sort of turn the clock back and seek to undo existing Act 250 permit requirements that could pertain to tree cutting, logging, forestry, of the type that might be in place for a stream buffer, an aesthetic buffer, that kind of thing, a deer wintering area. So that, I mean, this is not insignificant. And we'll also hear from legal about this. Does anyone want to kind of have a more in-depth conversation about this now, or have you?
Kirsten, this is not the same as the Stony Brook situation. This is just about where conditions for a permit would be and would not be applied, as opposed to where the permit would have jurisdiction.
This is saying that there's no draft of a statute available at this time, but the idea would be that when development comes under an Act 250 permit, that the permit would not impose conditions that would restrict logging or forestry, basically. That, again, with some caveats that it couldn't negate, like, this is just my own kind of interpretation of how this would work as it pertains to logging forestry. It couldn't negate like restrictions on tree clearing that would be necessitated to mitigate impacts under the Act 250 criteria. Like, that would still, to the extent if there's a nexus between the project and tree clearing, like, the commission would still have the ability to impose restrictions on tree cutting, and by extension, potentially in some cases, logging and forestry, which aren't aren't always the same thing, as I understand it.
Yeah, Kirsten, I understand I think I understand the intention. I was just trying to tease apart the difference between the Stony Brook situation, which is where the parcel is actually chopped up and the permit only applies to a portion of it. And this example where the permit applies to the whole parcel, it's just that there aren't conditions in that permit that impact logging in portions of it, right? It's different from the Stony Brook in that way. Am I reading that right?
Well, let me take a stab at it, maybe, because I have what it boils down to me is it's saying, okay, this logging and forestry is an exempt activity. However, if I have an existing Act 250 permit on my property that has a stream buffer that says you cannot clear any of these trees in the stream buffer, allowing this kind of treatment of forestry or logging does not then give you permission to violate that tree buffer and cut it down. That's ultimately what our concern is. Yes, fine, we know that you're exempt, but if I have a tree buffer because I need it for aesthetics under my Act 250 permit and I had to build this buffer, then somebody can't come in and say, I'm exempt, I'm a logger, and I get to cut down all the trees even though they're under an Act 250 permit. That's what we're trying to protect against.
Yep, I understand. Sounds good to me.
Well, yeah, and in addition, beyond existing permits, the concept would still give commissions the right to restrict tree clearing where necessary to mitigate undue or adverse impacts that would otherwise occur without such a restriction. So
So I think with number one, what we've done is, say that we don't have an objection to Forest Parks and Rec or somebody else bringing forward legislative change, but we are indicating what vehicle to move that forward with. So that's just some feedback here, is rather than saying, you know, we don't object. I think maybe having a recommendation for, if this is going to move forward, be a little bit more explicit with it and say, Forest Parks and Rec should work with Ledge Council to propose. I just think that we could be a little bit more definitive with number one, if that's something that we are opting for.
Makes sense. Brooke?
This is our statute. And if we are recommending a statutory change to the definition of development, we should be proposing that language and have our lawyers draft it up. This is, I don't see this as, oh, let Forest Parks go talk to the legislature about our statute. I don't feel comfortable with that.
So, oh, go
You're
ahead,
on-
Janet.
You're on mute.
I think what Sarah's saying is be more explicit here.
Yeah.
It's a good
Just the
point.
way that
I
it's
agree with
written.
Brooke and Sarah. We should be the ones drafting the proposed language, not FPR or ANR, if we believe this will help.
So,
Yeah.
so maybe to reframe number two as the board will explore doing this.
So number one, you mean?
I'm sorry,
Right,
number
so-
one. Yeah.
So
Sorry.
this, does the board want to get to that level of specificity with an actual language proposal as part of this report, or just capture how that would occur? Like, you know, that we would
I mean, my
work with
opinion would be
FPR on
that,
and our attorneys.
my opinion would be that no, not for this report. There's
Okay.
not enough time. And so it would be something that we would look to do in the future.
Okay. Sarah?
I was just gonna say, just in terms of wording, I think in some of the prior recommendations, we are saying that we are going to take some of those things on. We're going to do it's recommended that we do the rule change. I think just making sure that when we're providing recommendations that we're as specific with all of them, that we get to the same level of specificity. And where possible, we don't just leave things out in the ether in terms of, well, someone could do this. Well, I think if we could pinpoint that a little bit more and not leave it to subjectivity, that would probably be my advice.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't know that it would necessarily be able to be uniform across all elements. There may be some recommendations that are sort of obvious, like do this and it's pretty baked, and other ones where it is still, the nature of it is still a little less defined. But I agree with what you're saying. So this, Stony Brook, was a request from participants to have Stony Brook, and this was included in this item because they're kind of intertwined, so it's just addressing it here, but there was a request to say, take Stony Brook and just make it apply by default, even beyond wood products, like this default simplified, and it's not that simple. The commission has to review and approve it, and you do have to have some basic information to support the request. You have to, the applicant would make the request, and we can make that known to wood products that this exists, there's this feature, here's how to do it. You have to have a map, and you have to demonstrate that that subset of the tract is the land that supports the development and that is impacted by the development under the Act 250 criteria. So it's just not as simple as kind of like this cookie cutter or automatic. I mean, the commission has to review, like, what is that land as it relates to the development activity. So it wasn't seen as something that could just be a simplified, apply it by default. Alex?
Totally agree. Think it's really important for the district commissions to be able to render a judgment on that. But you've educated me through these documents about Stony Brook. Didn't know anything about that case prior to reading this stuff. And it was clear to me that the former board, land use panel, whatever the heck it was called back then, did get close to adopting rules to clarify this and not have it just be a case way back in time that you have to refer to. So I think what I would suggest is that rather than just saying it cannot apply by default and the board does not support making it so, that we could have a more positive recommendation that says, just like in Rule 16 and in Rule 19 and in Rule 34, that the board will consider and discuss rulemaking to provide, to formalize the Stony Brook concept and provide clear and clear guidance to the district commissions on that front.
Sarah.
I think to that point too, there's an education outreach possibility where we can do a better job at potentially educating applicants in terms of this is something that you could take advantage of or may want to consider, however we want to frame it. I think this is something that might have some spillover into some of the other things that we're studying and evaluating under the Act 1A1 stuff. I'm thinking possibly even with Tier 3 stuff. So this, I want to highlight this as being important. I think it would be easy enough to even just to start with something in terms of educational material.
It is going to be in the
Right.
the information sheet, if not without using the Stony Brook language. So,
the planned fact sheet supplemental guidance, the thought was to include a reference that this is what the stakeholder group wanted to occur, at least make it better known that this is available. So to include that on the fact sheet supplemental guide directly, explicitly, with not all the detail of the instructions, but like you had said with a link. Brooke?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I totally agree with Alex, and Stony Brook should be put in a rule. So we should put it on our rule list. But I do want to just say, Stony Brook is not some ancient case. It is a well-developed analysis, sort of like the Queechy test, right? We could have the Queechy test in a rule, but it came out of and was, developed through case law. So it's not as remote as it sounds, and we do have a guidance document on it that you can link to in this report. So I just wanted, it's pretty well developed, but it is a little complicated. You gotta like allowing people to subdivide without subdividing. Where's the line? So.
I appreciate the context, Brooke, but at the same time, having read the materials, at least from what I read, it's a case that didn't even use the concept. It just postulated that it could be used. The case in question didn't implement it, right? So well, I'm going into the weeds. I'm just saying, I really think that we need to clarify with rulemaking, even if we have guidance today. I think it's super important that we make this clear and we make some policy decisions about the use of this.
Yeah, I hear you. But I think that's all right. Let's go forward.
So the third part of this kind of area where kind of like how and where is the land governed by Act 250 considered was a request to explicitly exempt all logging and forestry where below 2,500 feet on all parcels with an existing Act 250 permit. And, the thought here in terms of what's been written is that, well, there's already an exemption for logging and forestry, and that we have to be really careful not to negate all these existing Act 250 permits. And so there wasn't any specific statutory language that we were we were looking to see advanced with respect to this concept.
I agree with that.
Okay. And this is a little wordy. We could probably sort of pare this down a little bit. Maybe I would work with Brooke on that. It's a little, the information about logging and forestry being exempt below 2,500 feet will go in the fact sheet so that that's clearly understood. And so applicants can just be aware of that when they're applying. They have the opportunity, they can make it known to the commissions, like this whole area of the parcel is planned for or may in the future, be put into that use. Okay. This item 6 is sort of a spin-off of the whole topic of permit specialist, and a number of participants raised how helpful that role can be. And there was a fair bit of conversation in the stakeholder group around it's not just the role of a live person permit specialist in the traditional sense as has previously existed, particularly with relevancy to A&R permit guidance, but that there could also be, some other components to, the usefulness of that role. And so they were sort of listed here conceptually. And the idea is just to continue advocacy for having this kind of role. And Brooke, I don't know if you want to mention, but there was a nexus to some recognition that this role could be of use in the appeals realm.
Yeah, I think the conversation came up, the original suggestion was, gee, could we have like the permit specialist just for the wood products manufacturer? And you'll see that in the recommendations that were sort of discarded or not, the ones that aren't recommended. And that was pretty much from the group saying, well, gee, we're talking about an average of 2 permits a year. It doesn't make sense to have one specific person for that. And during that conversation, I brought to their attention that we are discussing this ombudsperson, permit specialist replacement kind of thing related to our EJ responsibilities over the different permitting programs. And so that got some traction, but the primarily the conversation centered on, okay, there is now a permit navigator computer thing, but it was articulated that is really only helpful for the more sophisticated applicants. And we still miss having a person. And so it's the notion of trying to satisfy all of the public, which EJ requires the applicants, the neighbors, the municipalities. And so trying to advance that to serve this function as well, we think is really important. People were supportive of it, even though it wasn't specific to wood products. So I think it's a great idea. It's going to be a matter of trying to get it funded and organized. But I had a conversation with the PUC clerk yesterday to try to get some information and try to connect in with them, since they're on the list of permitting authorities that are also EJ entities.
So this item would just be the board will advocate for such, and I support
Yeah.
that.
Alex?
I like the idea. I see the benefit. I'm not sure I support us advocating for it, and here's why. And sorry, Brooke, I know this is important to you as part of the appeals thing, but I'm not sure it's feasible. I think it's important for us, if we're going to advocate for this, to understand how many requests the permit specialists that used to exist actually fielded and how many of them there were. My recollection was that there were several. There wasn't just 1 or 2 for the whole state, and that when I used to push applicants onto them from my municipal role, they had a lot of people they were working with and they had to get back to, and so I definitely see the benefits, but I would hate for us to advocate for a system that requires so much in resources and so many people that it's just like we're just talking about something that's not even possible, that's not even in the realm. So I'm fine with it being in this report. My suggestion was going to be for that last line to be, instead of therefore the board will likely pursue and advocate for, just therefore the board may pursue and advocate for, giving us, not holding us to that obligation. If, for example, we collect some data at a later time and realize, oh my goodness, like that would require 7 new staff people in A&R, and there's no way we're going to get that funded.
Oh, I hear everything you're saying. This is not like my personal agenda or anything. This comes out of the predecessor report to what led to Act 181. And it's not like, I think the big problem is that none of these programs would be able to set up such an office. And I'm not talking as many people as you're envisioning. We're talking more than one person, like having to, maybe, 3. I don't know how many permit specialists there used to be, but yeah, I hear everything that you're saying, but if it were an office that served all of those different permitting programs, that's when it sounds like it would be more feasible, because it would be a shared cost that no one program would have to be burdened with. And if it helps to alleviate the burden that has by default fallen on our district coordinators, then I do have an agenda if that does help our program to administer Act 250 in a quicker, more expedient way. So that's all.
Sarah.
So I would agree with Alex in terms of this is something that we may consider, but not locking us into necessarily definitive. And I think it's useful to sort of understand some of the history of how we got to this point in terms of abandoning the people for an online portal. And the portal perhaps is not robust enough, but looking to adaptation. And I believe the state is pioneering the use of artificial intelligence, AI, in different arenas, and looking to there are different ways of problem solving now, including the use of AI with some of these more basic types of portals that could be integrated and expanded upon the existing web portal that was created. So I would offer, I think maybe we can build in some flexibility in this in terms of recognizing the shortcomings of the current portal in terms of addressing all concerns, and that there might be some other ways other than just turning it back to people and standing it up, because I have the same concern that Alex does. If you get 1 or 2 people, that is not going to be enough for the potential onslaught. So I think this is something that we can't necessarily, within the confines of just this report, think through that complete appropriate solution. I think we can identify the need and leave the door open, if that makes sense.
Janet?
So I'm happy to replace will likely with may in that last penultimate sentence, I guess. No, it is the last sentence. And then we have one more recommendation under this section, and then we are a little bit over, but we started late. But I think by the time we finish with this, we will have given this an hour, and I think we can continue in our next meeting with the rest of the report. So should we take number 7 here for the log and pulp yard recommendation?
That sounds great. So basically the background to this is that the definition of wood products manufacturer establishes that log and pulp concentration yards, which are locations where logs are sort of aggregated. It's not referring to the log landing necessarily that's like on the property where the logging occurs. It could be a transfer or storage or a sorting yard that could be elsewhere. So this would be recognizing that that kind of log management, storage, transfer activity is part of logging and forestry and would therefore generally be exempt in the way that was in effect for years pursuant to an earlier advisory opinion. And the question is, and this would help facilitate development of those facilities and locations for that kind of expanded log storage to occur, as may be more important as it pertains to some circumstances at the border, where currently in the Northeast, as I have learned and understand, most of the logs head across the border for milling north of the border. And so by doing this, it would provide some time for additional manufacturing capacity to be stood up south of the border to create that manufacturing capacity that sort of as may occur depending on what happens with the tariffs and the border situation. So I just the sense I got from the stakeholder group is that there is recognition that there's desire to have more wood products manufacturing capacity developed in Vermont, and this would help with a piece of it. And there was support for recognizing that log concentration yards are part of logging. And we don't currently have a definition of logging and forestry in Act 250. I'm not myself recommending that we pursue that at this time. I think a simpler solution would be just to strike those words from the definition of wood products manufacturing. Sarah, let me just maybe kind of finish with, for the board, it's just a question of if there's interest in reinstating basically that log yards are considered part of logging. Do you want to do this in kind of like a wholesale way, or do you want to prescribe some requirements that would attach to, like, that log yards would be exempted and treated as exempt logging and forestry, providing certain conditions are met? And so these are some conditions to consider. And later you'll see in the not recommended for advancement part of the report, which you probably read, is there was some discussion of maybe having an industrial noise standard. So for instance, that's here, but we'll see where that conversation goes. So I don't, yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
So a couple of things. If it's located in a tier 1A area, it would be most likely exempt from Act 250. So I think you need to clarify that. Do you mean a tier 1B area? And then the second thing is later on in the report, there's a conversation around 1 in 10 acre towns and how I think the number is in the report. There's 20% of the wood product manufacturing that occurred on something that was less than 10 acres. It would be useful for me, at least in terms of including or excluding different options here, to know, is that 20% of sites smaller than 10 acres 100% of these types of facilities? What's the average size that we're looking at? Are you achieving the same results through either or of the recommendations, one we're deciding to exclude, one we're deciding to include? So that would just be helpful to me, is to get some numbers in terms of what has historically been included in Act 250 is jurisdictional, what size of the lot, and what percentage of that 20% would this address?
So these have been historically excluded from Act 250 jurisdictions, so we don't have that information readily available. Like, we'd have to go out to other sources and, I mean, insofar as the way the file review was based on, the Act 250 project information. But because these have not been traditionally under Act 250, we don't have information. And it would be a not insignificant research project, I think, to try to compile that information for log yards. Janet?
I think this is another one that, we're not going to be ready with a full-fledged recommendation by June 30th. So maybe constructing it as something that we will continue to look into. What do you think, everybody?
Brooke?
I know we want to stop this particular conversation, but, and move on to executive session, but, this is, when you get into the 10-acre issue, that is so fundamental in terms of our jurisdiction. I think we should be extremely cautious. And that is why the 10-acre recommendation, at least from my perspective, was put in the not to be done category. I think one of the issues is the number of permits here. The already existing logging and forestry exemptions. And I think the other aspects and recommendations that that Kirsten and I are recommending to put forward, we've done what we think from all of these options would help to the extent that we could. Changing the 10, I mean, what is the point of a 10 and 1 acre town? I mean, you're talking about the 1 acre trigger is because you do not have zoning. So there is no way to regulate the activity, in those circumstances, and I find that concerning. Act 250 has had exemptions, and over the years you can look at the historical record, and at what point do the exceptions consume the rule? It's a very complicated rule already with so many jurisdictional triggers. I am not interested in, especially being such a new board, to even consider making such a fundamental alteration in our statute.
This wasn't suggesting that, was it?
This particular
7?
suggestion about log yards is not in of itself. It's just, I don't know how it made its way into the definition of wood products manufacturing. I suspect it was incorporated to allow those facilities to take advantage of the benefits for this sector. And perhaps without realizing that had occurred. I'm not really sure I didn't study the legislative history around when that occurred. I didn't go back and research that, but here we are. So
yeah. And Kirsten, let me jump back in, because I just want to be clear about what I just said. I am 100% behind the recommendation to have the log and pulp concentration yards turned back to the way it was, right? I mean, by virtue of the additional language that was added, it's now not an exempt area, basically. And so long as there are not processing activities going on, what's the difference? It's a log landing kind of situation. That is different than what Sarah had mentioned in terms of the 10-acre issue about changing the jurisdictional trigger in a 1 acre town to 10 acres instead of 1 acre for wood processing manufacturing. That is what I am very concerned about and do not think we're in a position to be able to make that fundamental alteration.
Right, but we're not talking about that here under number 7. So, right?
Yeah, I
So
was just.
do we
yeah.
support number 7 as a board or not, is the question here.
I'll get back to your question about what do we want to do with this? And I think we need to say that we need to further consider it, because if you take a look at number 7, there are a bunch of things in terms of the industrial noise standard that later on in the report is not being recommended. And so I think that number 7 does need more study by the board, perhaps over the summer. I don't feel comfortable recommending this as it's currently put together. I think that there are some things that we do need to have a discussion on, which are probably more time than we have today and Monday combined. So I just would say I'm always one that's going to push for more data. I also want to put on the record of the other things that are later on that we'll discuss Monday, which are saying not being recommended, is something that the board has not had an option to discuss more fully. We need to be able to do that, and we need to understand it. And I understand what Kirsten's saying about time constraints. And I think where there are time constraints where we can't get the data to make decisions, going to something that sort of says we need more time to consider this, or this should be looked into further, is fine. We have a lot of time crunch here. We're only going to be able to get to so much.
Yeah, I just want to mention, for the sake of discussion, these kind of items, it's like if the board wanted to proceed with reinstating effectively an exemption for the log concentration yards, does the board want to prescribe that would only occur under any or one or more of these factors? So it was really kind of for discussion. It wasn't, I don't think Brooke and I are wed to, oh, you got to have all this detail necessarily. I think the manufacturing detail is not insignificant, but Janet.
Alex had his hand up first.
Oh, I'm
so-
sorry, Alex.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to like the last alternate option where we recommend, not in this report, but we say that a definition of log and pulp concentration yards should be added to statute, and then reinstate, what was a long-standing exemption for that use. As long as it meets the definition. And I think rather than trying to come up with all of the caveats that will be in that definition, which is what the first option shows, like, that's to be determined, right? That we would draft that later rather than getting into all the weeds of what a statutory change would read in this report. But in general, yeah, I think that the history of it really matters to me, and if the legislature made an inadvertent error in sweeping in these log and pulp yards when they define wood product manufacturers, which I think, Kirsten, is probably what happened. They were trying to do a good thing by making sure that use had access to the minor, review protocol. But without realizing that they just created jurisdiction. I think it'd be great to just get it back to the way it was with a definition of that term, and we can do that definition and suggest that to the legislature at a later date with more discussion, like Sarah was saying.
So I think that just goes back to rewording of this section to suggest that the board is going to consider these things and will, develop a recommendation further down the road, right? So. Okay.
Okay, I will work on some rewording
Okay.
based on today's conversation, and then I'm interpreting that we will be continuing this on Monday.
Yes.
We may want to look back at the agenda and allocate more time than was
I was just
considered.
I was just gonna say that, Kirsten, maybe for the
Yeah.
next 2 meetings. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate the feedback.
thanks for all your hard work on it. All right, let me get back to the agenda. So we are 20 minutes over, and I guess I'll say unless anybody has operations, budget, and legislative updates that cannot wait, we can just jettison that one. Any opinion on that?
I know a couple of things on the legislative front have come up in this meeting already. I'm happy to give you a quick, I can probably do it in about 1 minute if that's helpful, but happy to wait too.
Kirsten?
I know I'm just kind of mentioning Annette is one of the stakeholder group members on Wood Products. I didn't know before we adjourn. I just was, if there's I don't know if she had any public comment on that segment of our agenda today, but I just want to.
I think considering how far over the agenda we are, and that we're gonna be discussing this and giving it more time than we anticipated during our agenda setting meeting yesterday, that we'll make sure that we hear from Annette. Annette, are you here still? Yeah, there you are. Before we finish our discussions on this.
And it's possible some other people from the stakeholder group will be in attendance Monday. I don't know
Okay.
definitively.
Yeah. Do people want to hear Pete's 1 minute synopsis?
No,
Okay, go
because
Pete.
legislature
Go.
hasn't adjourned yet.
Oh,
Can't we
yeah,
just
it's
wait till
just gonna
next week? They might
change.
be adjourned next week.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say a couple things real quick. So S59 came up earlier. That one has been passed by both the House and the Senate, so that's up to the governor. That one is the open meeting law bill. And it has in it still the hybrid meeting exception for site visits. So that is in there, and it's at the last phases of process. S127 is in conference committee. That the companion bill there was H479, and that is again in conference committee. That would move up the appeals date and also have the have us account for our resources if the appellate duties are transferred for Chapter 117 and Act 250 appeals to the board. So there's just they will conference, and then there'll be an up and down vote from each body if it moves forward. And then yeah, we're hoping that they'll be done on Friday. We'll see. And at that point, the inner workings of NRB legal and administration staff will start getting outreach and implementation of anything that's come up through this process, and scrub and make sure that we've gotten accounted for every change that's been made and implement those. So I'll
Pete,
leave
you
it
just
there
said
unless there's any
NRB.
questions. Did I just say that? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you did. You're living in the past, man.
Living in the past, yeah. So with that, yeah, unless there's any questions, yield the floor here back to the agenda.
Okie doke. So we are at item I, discussion and possible action on appeals enforcement and attorney-client memoranda. Do I have a motion?
I think you skipped H.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
I can be really quick.
Okay,
Okay.
yes, I'm sorry. We are at H.
That's all right. So communications, I think I have just a check-in and some quick sort of decision points for the board. So I've been sort of trying to compile what we have institutionally for communications history. And I can share a screen, but I think I'll be quicker and say that we have a 1998 version from the Water Resources Board. And also, what configuration was that? That was the configuration of the Water Resources Board and the Vermont Environmental Board. And it was a code of conduct and communications policy. So since then, we have our formal procedural rules, which have developed and evolved. And we've had some different memos from executive directors. Pete updated ours in January in terms of media requests and legislative requests. And so looking back to all this and trying to synthesize it to get a basic bare bones communication plan of what we're trying to communicate, who we're trying to communicate to, internal and external communications, and what those look like. And codifying some of the things, for instance, that Alex ran into for press releases. How does that process play out? So I'm going to continue drafting. Pete's been great about getting me sort of synopsis of what internal communications look like, how we use them, different channels. But some of the things just to sort of take a temperature on in terms of drafting from the board is there are different expansive models of communication policies, and some of them can also tackle employee engagement, complaints, and outreach. And as part of the environmental justice components, we are eventually going to be doing that public outreach portion. We can sort of put a pin in it for later and tackle that either now or later. And then there's also the rough version of, I think we've all sort of, since we've been in these roles, fielded various different informal questions or complaints or things like that. Not anything formal, but just some parameters around what does that look like. And then also sort of that employee engagement is how are we communicating with our employees and engaging them in decision-making processes. So those are three different areas that I just would like to get a quick pulse on from the board before I move further.
Any input for Sarah now? Kirsten?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like to see a draft before I kind of feel like I need to see something before I think it sounds like it should mostly be fairly straightforward, but I think particularly maybe the internal communications might have some really substantive detail. I just don't know what it looks like. And I also wonder if it is looking to also encompass communications with our state agency partners. I don't know if that sort of overlaps with this. Like there's these old, MOUs that define, for example, how we coordinate with AOT. I just don't know how far it goes. So I kind of, if there's an outline, like I appreciate what you've just shared, but if there's a written outline that you are able to share, that would help my general understanding of what, like the level of detail that this would encompass.
So I'm happy to continue drafting and draft some detail around those areas, but before I spent time on drafting that, I just wanted to check in and see if that was a no-go for the board. Of we'll get to those things later. We really just right now need to tackle those sort of very important things like press releases, how we do them, those things that are staring us in the face. I can draft around that. And just to answer your question, Kirsten, this is going to identify who our stakeholders are and how we try and communicate to them, but won't get into the very details of those MOUs or things like that. It won't seek to touch those or do anything with those. It will basically just identify who we communicate with and how we generally try and communicate with them. Brooke.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted some guidance on was like communications with our public, like if a board member gets a letter. How do we determine, is that something I share with the whole board? Do I respond directly, just myself? So that's something I think is important. In terms of timing on this, I know this stuff is important, but we're under a lot of deadlines. So, I think that's up to you in terms of your workflow.
So excellent observations, and I think that's where the 1998 version had the code of conduct and communications policy, because it was sort of that overlap of how do you deal with these things. Our procedural rules that we have are a lot more specific, and those are going to be updated separately. But I do think that it probably would be wise to take some lessons learned from the 1998 version and have in there just basically, you know, if we got a letter, how would we'd say, yes, thank you very much. I got the letter. It's being pushed over here for something to be done with. So that's the communications portion versus how we conduct ourselves and what happens to it thereafter. So I'll continue drafting, and I think what I've heard from the board is to give some structure, maybe throw some things out. These aren't no-go areas. We'll continue drafting. And I'll look to, also, I'm keeping this simple because just getting back to what Brooke said, we have so much on our plate to do right now, and where we're going to land after probably December is going to be very different than where we're at right now. So making it flexible and bare bones, but something that we can build on for the future. Janet.
Just stick a pin in the part about community outreach. I think it's okay to start something, and this isn't rulemaking. It's not going to be really difficult to expand later or to modify later. We can do that, you know, as we see fit. So it's not something that we need to plan months in advance to make a change to. So I think being as broad as we feel we can be on the communications protocols is fine. And we'll be, you know, working on it. It'll be a living document.
All right, and thank you. And for the sake of time, I think I have some time on Monday on this. I did hear back from the state about the other board, but I'll tackle that on Monday. So thank you, guys.
Okay, thanks. All right, sorry. Now we are at item I. Oh, Kirsten.
I'm so sorry. I have a
okay.
lingering wood products question that I wanted to ask the
okay.
board that I didn't get to in our agenda setting dates and time topic. So we have the public board meeting for this report, which is scheduled for Monday, June 16th. And I have worked with Pete and, as you know, Janet, on a draft press release that we intend to issue tomorrow to make it known that that public meeting opportunity exists, and also that interested people can submit comments in writing. But I'm wondering how long the board would like that public meeting to be. I was envisioning 1 to 3, like allocate 2 hours, or it could be 2 to 4, but a 3-hour meeting seems.
No, yeah, I agree. I think 2-hour meetings for a public meeting is the limit, unless you have like a long intermission with food in the middle. So I would limit it to 2.
And this is in Randolph. What time would everyone like that to start?
I think that'll be up to you.
Okay.
Decide.
We'll do okay.
What time have some of the other ones been starting? Your stakeholder meetings and such.
Oh, the stakeholder meetings for wood products?
Yeah.
We had one that started in the morning and one that started at 2, but that was because of a schedule conflict that one key participant had. But we otherwise would have started at 1.
I mean,
I think 1 to 3 sounds good.
For public meetings, that it's better to have them a little later because most people work
to accommodate work
5.
schedules is always helpful. And from my perspective, I see Maddie has her hand up.
Go ahead, Maddie.
Yeah, I just want to flag that we have the room booked from 12 to 5.
Yeah.
So maybe 3 to 5?
3 to 5? Yeah. Okay, I like that plan. No objections. We'll proceed accordingly.
Do you want to move that up a little bit? Because if we're supposed to be out of there at 5.
Oh, out of there at 5.
Okay. 2:30.
2:30 to 4, 2:30 to 4:30. Thank you.
All right, now, three's a charm. Item I. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the requisite motion that we go into executive session to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals and enforcement actions and to have confidential attorney-client communications, the premature public knowledge of which would place the board at a substantial disadvantage.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Brooke. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That was 5 ayes, unanimous decision. We will see you on the other side in a little bit.
Janet, it looks like the rest of the board is back.
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion. At least one. I don't know what happened after I left. Sarah,
I would like to move to authorize enforcement to transmit a notice of alleged violation with directive to remit payment for the required transportation impact fee for enforcement case number 2025_042.
thank you.
Second,
Thank you, Alex. Any discussion? Seeing, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That was 5 separate ayes. That is unanimously approved, that motion. Brooke,
Can we move on to another motion?
sure.
Great. I move to authorize legal counsel to inform appellants in closed case 23-ENV-144 that the board declines to enter into a stipulated motion to reopen the court's judgment in that case.
second,
Thank you, Alex. Any discussion?
Maybe we
So
should put in
I
the
should-
record. Yeah. that
Yeah.
you were-
Yes, I'm recusing myself from this case or discussion of this case, consideration of this case, and I will not vote on this motion. So, but I guess I can still call for a vote. So, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 That was 4 ayes from the 4 board members involved in that decision. Okay. Anything else? Well, I was not there. Okay. So I
Make a
think,
motion to adjourn.
okay, thank you, Sarah.
Second.
Thank you, Brooke. Before we vote on that, is there any public comment before we adjourn? I forgot, were we holding out for Annette at one point, or was that, we were saying in a separate meeting, we can hear from her. Okay, sorry. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 And that is unanimous. Thank you. Bye.